Welcome back to the cave, guys, and we want to get back into musky fishing. We're in the off season, but one of the questions I get asked so much is, what time of year do I need to come up to Canada? What are some of the can't miss baits? And what are some of the, on a broader sense, can't miss patterns? So a few years ago, I wrote a chapter for a book that Musky Hunter magazine put out called Can't Miss Patterns for Canada, or for musky fishing in general. And because I get asked a lot about this kind of stuff, specifically in private messages that people message me, and when people are looking for a guide trip or information on a certain lake, I thought it would be a really good off-season video, and that's what today is about. It's about 3 patterns, 3 doors. Which one are you going to pick? And going to break them down, going to give you guys some on the water examples, and then we're going to come back here and we're going to break it down on the little Tykes board and try and give you guys an idea of what it is that we look for, and hopefully that when you guys come up here, you'll be able to look for something very similar. It would be really easy to oversimplify this and just say, you need this bait, this bait, this bait, fish on this spot, and this spot. But rarely in musky fishing does that ever work. And even doing what we do here, and Dave and I don't try to hide the lakes we go to. We don't try to hide our spots per se. And people can find them if they're real savvy. But does that mean they're going to go there and have the same success? Of course it doesn't. There's so many variables. But when we kind of stand back a little bit and we have a broader view, there's some basics in there that you can take to try to put together a pattern, meaning where the fish going to be on a certain type of year or certain time of year, and what type of bait works the best there. So today it's going to be about 3 patterns that will help you guys achieve success when you come to Canada. What is a pattern, or what is a quote-unquote bite? We hear it so often up here that the rubber bite's on, the bucktail bite's on, the topwater bite's on, and that's a pattern, or that's a lure that's really working. But I think when we take a step back, what is the overall pattern? Pattern number 1 for us is midsummer, or when the weeds are up. We'll backtrack that a bit, and bucktails. Bucktails in the weeds in Canada on shield lakes is just amazing. And it almost doesn't matter what type of bucktail you're using. I just got 2 here. One's a flash. This is from Angling Revolution. And then this one is from Pandemonium. It's a half marabou, half flash. Couple of my favorites from the past couple of years. And what that pattern is when the weeds come up, and if we have an early spring and on opening day, the weeds are up really good, a lot of times right out of the gate, fish are firing on bucktails in those weeds. And you need to find the best weeds available. And that is difficult on these shield lakes because so many spots have weeds, but not all weeds are created equally. We're looking for that big broadleaf tobacco cabbage primarily. Other types of weeds will hold fish if there's not better weeds available. But a lot of times up in Canada, you're going to see sand flats that hold weeds. And one of the deceptive parts about people that come up and fish shield lakes for the first time, you will see a rock shoreline and think there's no way there's going to be weeds here. But where that rock shoreline meets the sand bottom, and it can be 10, 12, even 20 feet deep, you can have a patch of weeds right next to a big rock wall. So it's deceptive in the fact that just driving by, it doesn't look like that's going to be a quote unquote weed spot. And that's where you have to spend some time mapping your lake, looking at it with side imaging, or forward facing sonar works great for this because you can really get a sense of how thick the weeds are. And then when you start to find it, lay some waypoints, go back in and try and dissect it a little bit more. Something that David and I do a lot is when you have a bluebird day, no wind and really high skies, we'll just drive around. We might fish, but we'll actually just go through a spot and try and visually map it out if you can see the weeds topping out on the surface on some of our clear lakes. And that exercise pays dividends down the road, but because you can place waypoints inside corners, outside corners, the thickest patch, you can place a couple waypoints where you might have a channel through the weeds. And for us using forward-facing sonar, we're able to pull up on those spots, see those really thick patches of weeds, and then see those little avenues that might be between the really thick patches. Those are always key. So when you guys are out there looking for weeds, find the first available weeds, and then you can start fishing through it. But when you start to see really thick clumps inside of a bigger area, so think size of a football field, and all of a sudden there's maybe a 10-yard section either direction that's thicker, that's going to be your spot on the spot within that broader section of weeds. And it's trial and error. Take some time to try and figure that out. But once you start to find the broader patches of weeds and zero in on those dense, thick patches, and if it has any kind of avenues or paths between it, that is just so key. So let's go check out a couple examples of us fishing the weeds, and we'll come back into the garage and we'll break it down. All right, guys, so I want to run through a couple examples here where I can do picture in picture and kind of give you guys an idea what it is we're looking at on the water as it relates to what I'm telling you guys out in the cave there. And hopefully this will help you guys at home be able to take something that we're doing here and bring it and kind of mesh it on your home water. So let's get into our first example here. All right, so this first example, Dave and I are fishing with his dad, and this small island that you can see in the back, there's a really small patch of weeds, but it's really, really thick. And around it, there's a couple sparse areas, but we're always looking for that thickest patch that we can find. And in this case, it's a very well-known spot to us, so it's not uncommon to see fish there. But again, it's that spot on the spot mentality we're looking for when it comes to fishing for fish in the weeds with bucktails. All right, my next example is the start of the season of last year of 2024, and we're looking for the best weeds that are available. And in this case, again, it's a well-known spot to us, sand beach with a lot of weeds that are separated from shore. That's always key. We're looking for that separation from the shoreline, and we're looking for the best weeds available within a broader area. So here I'm using the Mad mini tail, and it's like a castable fly, and you can see I'm just really slowly popping it over the weeds with keeping my rod tip up a little bit, and I get hit quite a ways out from the boat. And again, we're looking for those really thick pockets of weeds, and then we're also looking for any kind of avenues that might be in around those really thick pockets. Again, for Dave and I, we don't get too crazy when we get a fish hooked up. We're patient. We let the net man get to us. We don't try to do anything too fancy with the fish. All right, for our last example here, I'm going to go back to 2021, and this is as classic of a spot as you're ever going to find up on a shield lake, and it's a huge sand beach, and in amongst that sand, there's super thick patches of cabbage, and it's typical of a shield lake. It's huge, and it would take so long to fish all of it. So again, we're looking for those small pockets inside of that larger area. So let's go check out our third example here. And afterwards, I'll tell you what it is we're actually looking for in a little bit more detail.
There he is. Oh, son of a bitch.
So you can see I lost one boat side, and to save some time here, I jumped ahead, but I'm about 3 or 4 casts later, and we're fishing the outside edge of a long weed line. And again, we're looking for those super thick isolated patches that are in amongst all the rest of the weeds. And it's finding that needle in that haystack, and a lot of times that can really lead you to success and help eliminate just dead time on the water. So guys, from this third example, I want to take you guys straight out to the cave, and we can break down exactly what it is we're looking for when you find these great big sand beaches that you suspect there's weeds on, and how to find those and how to break them down. Welcome back to everyone's favorite part, the Little Tykes breakdown. And all 3 breakdowns today are going to be brought to you by really good friend of the channel and big supporter of what we do here, Adam Armstrong. Thank you so much for all the support over the winter. We really, truly appreciate it. So looking at those 3 examples of bucktails in the weeds, it's almost a case of wherever you find weeds, you're going to find fish. I wish it was that easy, but in our third example, it's a really good way to represent what it is we're looking at, because in that clip, you could tell it was a huge area, and it's the type of area that to fish it effectively, to hit the outside plus the inside, that could be an hour plus. So for Dave and I, over the few years So for Dave and I, over the past few years, we've seen the weeds fluctuate on where it is they top out to the surface. So before we had forward-facing sonar, we had just waypoints to go by. So we would find the edge of these weeds, and we would drop waypoints down, and then having waypoints, we could just pull ourselves a casting distance out from that, whether it's 50 feet, 40 feet, and cast into where we thought we'd see the weeds. And actually on this spot, we had a year where the weeds topped out, way out at 12 feet. But this particular year, the weeds were in a little bit tighter, and I lose a fish a little bit earlier in our pass here, and what we were doing is trying to find any patch that we thought was a little bit denser. And because we fish this spot a lot and we have a bit of knowledge on it, and this was before we had forward-facing sonar to actually see in and see these thick patches of weeds, we're going off of where our waypoints were. And again, we're putting waypoints down where we see thick patches, and we were part of the way down. I had lost that fish on a spot that we had historically known there was a pretty thick seam of weeds, and we knew we were coming up into an area that, again, historically, this big patch here is the last real thick patch, and then it starts to get a little bit sparser. So again, we're going off of memory, but we're going off of data that we had using waypoints. I cast up into the outer edge of that weeds, and I was able to get that fish. But the point I'm really trying to make with all this is, when you guys come up to Canada, you see these beaches that have weeds like this, get in there, try and find that outside edge, drop some waypoints so you can sit just off of it. And then as you're fishing it, visually see what you're fishing. If you can, use whatever electronics you guys have at your disposal to try and dissect these patches a bit more. And don't be afraid during the mid part of the day to actually get in there on your trolling motor and try and visually see what it is that's in there. Because like I said earlier, that's going to pay dividends down the road. And even on a 1-week trip, spending a couple hours looking over some of these weed spots will give you guys such a good base to go back at key times. And in a couple of the other examples, especially the one where I'm using the mini madtail, it's set up similar, but I'm looking for those little avenues between thick patches. So don't miss those as well, because a lot of times the fish aren't sitting on the outside edge. They're sitting along that edge, along an open path, expecting bait fish to go through. The second pattern that I think came really natural for me was dive and rise lures. This is a Harvey Javelin that I've had so much success with over the years. This is Topline jointed dipstick. Again, you're going to see this in the example. And we can't talk dive and rise without the OG, just the Suic Thriller. If you're coming to Canada and you don't have a Suic Thriller, you have to buy one. You have to have one in your box. I would say the 9-inch, the 10, and the 12, those are like staple baits. If you like bigger baits, get the 14-inch Franken Suic. Just thank me later. Those baits will not fail you up here on Shield Lakes. But for us, the second pattern is fishing rocks that are adjacent to shore. So think main lake points. Think islands with rocky outcroppings, and they do work on reefs. That's associated with this, but where a dive and rise really shines on our Shield Lakes is where you have rock shoreline and big boulders off of the shore, and then a shelf, and then that first main drop. And it's a really predictable pattern in the midsummer. So for us, we're talking like that July 7th, 4th to 7th, as we're starting to get into our max water temps. Weeds are growing up really well, and you're starting to see the muskies move to their summer spots. And in a lot of cases, those main lake points where you have nice rock rubble, that's just the spot that muskies always go to. And for us, it's a bite that we've been able to exploit over the years on the lakes that we go to, because we know spots that typically hold muskies because of lake current and because of just the way that wind affects certain lakes. So I would say to you guys, if you're coming up to Canada, look at some of the maps, look at Google Earth, and study how a spot lays out and take in account your predominant wind. So in a lot of cases in the summer, we'll get a lot of south, southwest, some west wind. If you're a little bit later in the summer into August, we start to get a little bit more north wind, maybe that first cold front of the season. But look at how wind can affect main lake points and points off of islands or saddles. Another spot that a bait lake like a dipstick or a Suic works so well is a saddle between islands or islands and mainland. And it's that mix of rock, even a little bit of weeds in there, some sand, and then that first break line. So let's go check out a couple examples of us using dive and rise around that perfect rocky outcropping from mainland or an island. And we'll come back here and we'll do a little breakdown on one spot that I think is really key for you guys. All right, behind door number 2 is one of my favorite types of baits. And like I was explaining, it is the dive and rise. And you can think of a dive and rise as a bunch of different things like I've kind of been explaining. But for us, we want that classic dive and rise profile, and something that's got a lot of shimmy, really works well. All right, let's dive into our first example here. And this is a Harvey Javelin. And this, again, is very classic shield structure. We're looking at deep rocks that break away off the point of an island. And it's what every guy looks for, every angler looks for when they come up to Shield Lakes. They're looking for this type of main lake structure. So you can see the island in the background, and on the right-hand side of that point, there's huge boulders that are kind of break away under the water and kind of form a little shelf. And I'm just trying to get that Harvey javelin up onto the edge of it and just kind of rip down as we're kind of breaking away from those rocks. And a lot of times fish sit tight in those rocks or just suspended off at a depth that they feel comfortable with. So sometimes it's that 5 to 10 foot range that they like to sit in. All right, that first example, like I said, guys, that's classic shield structure. You're looking for main lake points off of islands, and use your electronics and look for that submerged rock structure. As we get into our second example here, again, it's a Harvey javelin, but it's one that I want to show you guys because when guys come up to shield lakes, they're not in a lot of cases prepared for the huge open water structure that you might find on a lake like Eagle, like Lake of the Woods, like Lac Sewell, like Cedar, and you find this type of structure that's way off of shore. It's a reef, but sometimes they don't top up to the surface. It can be 5 to 10 feet under the surface, and it can be its own little ecosystem within a section of a lake. And in this case here, we'll run the example. And while you watch it, there's almost no context to where we are in the water, but there is actually a jug on a reef that tops out. I think this year with the water levels the way they were, was probably a couple feet under the water. And we were on the windswept side trying to reach kind of a 10-foot shelf just before that first main break. So let's go check out example number 2. Strong north wind pushing in, and I'm casting just on the north side of the main part of the structure, and I get hit quite a ways out from the boat. And because the boat's kind of drifting back over top of the fish, we had no idea how big this fish was until we actually got it in the net. Richie knew it was a big fish. I didn't even see it until I actually reached in, and then I knew we had a really big one. But it's just, this is the type of structure that you're going to find big fish on big water up on these shield lakes. All right, for example number 3, I'm going to go to one of the lakes that we kind of first learned how to musky fish on. We don't go there as often as we probably should, but it's the type of lake that's got 3 to 4 different styles of water in one lake, which a lot of lakes up here do. They have different sections. And in this example, I'm in semi-clear water. It's not clear. It's a fairly deep section of the lake, but what I really like about this section is it has a lot of rock that has deep breaking shoreline and really narrow shelves along the shoreline that really lead themselves to a style of presentation like dive and rise, because you can cast up close to shore, you can just rip across the top of that shelf, and then as it starts to break away, you can really try to rip it down a few times right at that break line and try and encounter some of those suspended fish. So let's go check out example number 3, where I'm using a Topline Baits dipstick, which is a perfect style of bait for this style of fishing. Again, we got some wind plowing across this point, and I get hit way out from the boat over top of some big boulders and right where that first main break line starts to break down. And dive and rise is just a classic presentation for this type of fishing up on the shield lakes. It doesn't matter which lake you go to, where you find those big boulders just slightly separated from shore and then a nice break line. You get so many fish that suspend in and around those break lines that dive and rise is just such a great choice. This last example is so classic that we're going to head into the cave and we're going to break this one down a little bit more, and we can kind of tie it into our other examples as well, because when you guys come up to shield lakes, you need to understand what it is you're looking for and know that not every main lake point or every main lake break line is going to be the same. And there's a few key things that we can really look for that are going to help you guys achieve success. Of all the patterns that a lot of, especially Americans that come up to shield lakes, the one that they feel the most comfortable with is this. They want to cast shoreline. We see it so often. They want to just cast right up to shore, bring their bait over that shelf, and then just get their bait up to the boat. So this ties right into that style of fishing. And in a lot of cases, you can get away with any bait here. But where I think a dive and rise, again, like this Harvey Javelin, really shines is you can get that bait right up super tight shallow, and then you can almost rip it right across those rocks and then out over open water and then up to the boat. And what a dive and rise gives you over a bucktail, over a topwater there, and even over rubber to some degree is that real slow shimmy rise that rubber doesn't give you. And what we're looking for here is sitting out deep enough that you can access that first break line, cast in, and then you want to be able to target that whole shelf area. And again, like we've seen in the examples, it can be a main lake point, it can be a point off an island, it can be a saddle. Think of this as a saddle between, if this went back up to another island, you want to hit that whole area because these fish can sit anywhere from right against shore to suspended off of this break line. And it's key to be able to keep your bait down in the water column and try and put that bait in a position that a muskie doesn't have to move far from those rocks, because even a neutral fish will come up, generally speaking, and have a look at a dive and rise that's hanging right in front of their face. And even a crankbait works similar to this. And there's different types of cranks that you can crank in and it'll flutter up, crank in, flutter up. So if you guys are more comfortable with that, that's a type of bait that works well in this scenario. And this is going to tie right into our next breakdown where we start to look at rubber over this next section of water. Summer in Canada would not be complete without some rubber. These are like two of the OGs. You got your Bulldog and your Medusa. You got to have both of them up here. I know some people gravitate one to the other. And for a lot of us, the 10-inch Red October tube is just an absolute staple bait. Doesn't matter which one for me. I love all of them. Obviously, I lean a lot on the tube. And last year we leaned a lot on the Pitbull, but the Medusa's been a great producer for us over the years, and one of my examples will have the Medusa in it. But from about the mid part of July, where we have summer peak, around that 15th to the 25th of July, factor in either a new moon or a full moon in that period. That's kind of summer peak up here. The weeds are as high as they're going to get. Water temps are as high as they're going to get. We haven't had that big cold front yet to drop things down. We might have a couple summer storms and the water may cool a bit, but that's when you start to see fish pull off a structure a bit, and they're sitting over open water but suspended adjacent to structure. And there's just no bait better to target those fish than big rubber. And for us, like I say, I really lean on the tube because you can get it up and down in the water column so much. And what we're looking for is a continuation of that second pattern I talked about with dive and rise. So you look at those spots where you had those shelves and then that main drop down to the basin. Now we're pulling our boat off a structure more. And in the examples, you're going to see we're off a structure. We're casting to more of an open water style of fishing, but using electronics or using your waypoints or your contour lines on your map, you're trying to just reach that first break line. So if that first break line's at 12 feet deep and it drops down, and maybe there's a second break line at 20 and then it drops down to 50. We want to hit that point between that 12-foot drop and say that 20-foot drop. And in a lot of cases, the fish will be suspended off of those breaks, even at depth. Sometimes these fish are sitting 20, 25 feet down, but they'll be suspended over deeper water, and you cast rubber and you get that rubber partway down to them, they will come up and crush rubber. And the thing about targeting these fish, and it's something that the Eagle Lake guys have done for years, sitting one cast distance further away from structure than what anybody would think you'd do. So where your boat's sitting, that's where they want to cast. They want to pull way out, cast in. We've talked about it a bunch, and I'm going to do a redo on one of the videos we did a few years ago. It's right here, talking about fishing too close to structure. And I want to touch on this subject because I think what we're doing here today will naturally lead into looking at that subject a bit more. But for you guys coming up to Canada, you have to be comfortable fishing in deep water, knowing that a lot of these fish suspend out away from structure. Let's go check out some examples. That'll be the easiest way to explain this, and then we'll circle back around and we'll do a little Tykes breakdown back in the shop. Our third pattern here today, or style of fishing, is rubber over deep water. And this kind of ties into where we were with dive and rise, but for us, we kind of approach it a little bit differently. We think of more open water or more away from that first break. We're starting to look at that secondary break, or we're starting to look at really steep breaking shoreline that doesn't have as much of a shelf like that before it breaks down. So let's go check out our first example here, and we'll kind of talk you guys through what it is we're looking for in certain areas. So we are way off of shore here, and there's a big sand point that runs out way out in front of me, and I'm just trying to hit that transition line that goes from like 12 feet down to 30 or 40. And I was casting a swimming dog from the back of the boat, and I was able to pull that fish that was sitting suspended on top of that real deep break line, and he followed up to the boat and got him to go in the 8, which was really cool. So a lot of people wouldn't think of a swimming dog or a Poseidon or just a swim bait in general as something that you would use over deep water or over those really deep breaks. But for us, we know that in a lot of cases, those fish are sitting suspended. So if the depth is 10 to 12 feet deep, and then that starts to have a steep break, it might go down to 30, 40 feet. The fish might be sitting off of that break line, but they're still only sitting down 10 to 12 feet. And a swim bait that's going over top of them anywhere from 4 to 8 feet deep is right in that sweet spot where a muskie can just come up easily, pick it up, doesn't have to follow it to the surface. In this case, it actually followed right up to the boat. And the nice thing with something like a swim bait is you can do a lot with it at the boat, where some other types of rubber, you don't have as much options in a figure 8, but a swim bait just looks so lifelike and it lends itself perfect to a figure 8. Here I am casting a twisted tube. Everybody knows I love the tubes up here, and tubes are great. And I'm casting up over a deep rocky break line. There's actually a reef off of that island that you see there. I fast forward this a bit. This fish puts up a pretty good fight. Tiger muskie, go figure. But we're looking for that underwater reef and then the deep water surrounding it. In this case, we had a lot of current around there too. And something like a tube, a twisted tube, a toad, something that gets down that you can work a little bit slower than some of the other rubber is just a perfect choice for this style of fishing. In our last example, I could have went a bunch of different ways, but I actually picked a Medusa, and it was one of the first fish I got on our Sunset Jailbird pattern, Medusa. And again, it's a classic kind of piece of structure that you would see up on these deep shield lakes. So it was an easy one for me to kind of show you guys. And then afterwards, we're going to go right out to the cave and we're going to break this spot down and kind of give you guys that idea on what to look for when you come up to Northwestern Ontario and you're looking to try and really succeed with rubber. And it's a style of bait that a lot of guys come up here with and they struggle, not in the sense that they struggle to contact fish, because in a lot of cases you can use rubber in a lot of different areas, but they struggle over deeper water or over these deeper break lines to really put themselves in the right position to use a rubber bait like a Medusa, like a bulldog, like a tube, like a toad really effectively. So let's go check out example number 3. Again, I'm sitting away from shore. That's going to be a key takeaway from all of this rubber strategy that we're using. And it's getting that Medusa down into the water column, into that 6 to 8, sometimes even a little bit deeper for us, and just letting it hang down there and not being super aggressive with it. Those fish that are sitting down a little bit suspended, they'll easily come up for something like a Medusa, a toad, or a tube. And I'm going to go straight out to the garage and show you guys the breakdown on this spot, because I think it's just a key area that you guys really need to understand when you're coming up to Shield Lakes. Now we're right in my wheelhouse. This style of fishing that I like to do, Dave likes to do, and it's a style of fishing that I show a lot of my friends and guests. It's different when you've never fished like this. So if we're looking at this Lake Topo, and think of the last image I give you guys of that steep break and then down to the bottom, that's this area up here. This might be a rocky shoreline. It could be bedrock, but at about 8 feet, it has that first drop that starts to drop down to maybe 20. And then in this case, a lot of times we see another drop from anywhere from 12 to 20 feet, and then it drops down into the basin. I just put 30 plus feet because in a lot of cases, a lot of our lakes get down into that 25 foot plus, 30, 50, 60, 70 feet. Whatever the case is, we want to target that first break line and then that next prominent break line. And the difference with rubber versus a dive and rise is dive and rise, you get it in there and it flutters up. Rubber, you rip it forward and then you pause it and then it kind of starts to fall down. You rip it upwards, so it's the exact opposite. So in this case, trying to cast that Medusa up above that first break line, pulling it out, and then letting it fall. So you think of that break line as just a gentle slope or even a set of stairs. You want to let your rubber kind of fall down in there, but always trying to keep it above the fish. So if you think that fish might be suspended 8 to 12 feet down, or even in this case, over 20 feet, you're probably not going to get this bait down 20 feet, but you want to get it down 8 to 12 feet. And in the case of a red October tube or a pounder, that's no problem. And those fish will come up. But what we're looking for with this style of fishing is that steeper drop. And it can even drop straight from shore, almost a straight down drop. What we're looking at is where that bedrock meets the sand bottom or the softer bottom, and looking for anywhere a fish could suspend along there. And if you can tie it into that second example where you'd use dive and rise and now it's just that next drop down, it's such a complex spot that it's going to hold fish. You tie any kind of lake current into this and it's just going to be lights out. And for a lot of people, us included, when we were newer at this, we would just pound a dive and rise or a suic all across this spot. And we did catch fish. So it gives you a false sense of security thinking, okay, we got this. But now we go back to a spot like this and we start to use rubber that we can get down a little bit deeper and it's not fluttering up. It's actually going down towards the fish. It's just such a great presentation. And it's one that I think a lot of people look at rubber as that mid-depth style of bait. And for us, we use it as a mid to deep style of bait. Even though we will use it in shallower water around reefs, this is where it really excels up here on these Shield Lakes. There's no such thing as a foolproof pattern on Shield Lakes. Muskies are going to be muskies, and Shield Lake muskies, they will run to the beat of their own drummer. And it seems like sometimes guys come up here and they just have these amazing weeks where they catch 30 fish. And then the next time another guy comes up and he has a week where he catches 1. There's really no rhyme or reason, but we always think you have to stack the odds in your favor. And one of the biggest things that we see guys do is they come up here and they try to rely on their tactics from home, and they get caught up in a rut, or even worse, they go out on day 1, they're throwing a bucktail around to just move some fish, they encounter some fish, and then they just try staying with that pattern because they move some fish and they're not willing to pivot and try and do things a little bit different. So the goal of today was to give you guys some starting points. Bucktails in the thickest, sloppiest weeds. You can vary your size of your bucktail, you can vary the color, you can vary the depth of your bucktail. And once you know there's fish in those weeds, play around with different styles of bucktails. Those fish will come out. And yeah, in a lot of cases, guys want to go to a different presentation like a topwater. That's great. But when you are up here and you're trying to get it done, keep it simple. Bucktails in the weeds, you're going to catch fish up on shield lakes. And when you guys come up here and you want to use some dive and rise, look for those main lake points like we've been talking about. And in a lot of cases, a dive and rise is going to show you fish. Even if they're not biting, they're going to come out and they're going to have a look. You can get some waypoints down. You can start to come back at key times. But I almost guarantee that if you keep fishing dive and rise baits around that broken rocky shoreline, you're going to catch fish. And lastly, using big rubber over that deep breaking shoreline, you are going to encounter fish. A lot of cases, you're not going to see a lot of fish that are suspended down there. So unless you have good modern electronics, you may not see them. But the bites that you get when your rubber's down 10 or 12 or 15 feet on shield lakes are amazing. They almost stop you dead in your tracks. It's just one of the most fun ways to catch a muskie. And hopefully, guys, this has brought you guys some value, and you'll be able to look back on this video as you're planning your trip to Canada. And hopefully we give you guys 3 patterns that you guys are going to be able to lean on and hopefully have a ton of success. Check out the video right here where I had some awesome success on the Red October tube, one of my favorite baits, and it comes straight out of what I just told you guys. And for now, 54 Bus is out of here. We'll catch you guys out on the water later.